I've told this story exactly 3 times in my life. Once to my wife. Once to my cousin. And once to a sheriff's deputy who looked at me the way people look at someone they've already decided not to believe. After that, I stopped telling it. But it happened. I know what I experienced up on that ridge, and I know it wasn't an animal, it wasn't a person, and it wasn't my imagination. I was 34 years old. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. I'd been hunting those mountains since I was 11 years old, and in 23 years I had never once come down off that ridge early. That morning, I came down with my hands shaking so bad I could barely get my truck keys out of my pocket. Let me back up. My name is Marcus. I grew up in Carter County, Tennessee, about 40 minutes from the North Carolina line. My grandfather owned land up on Roan Ridge, about 80 acres of hardwood timber that had been in his family since the early 1900s. When he passed, it went to my dad. When my dad got too old to make the climb, it started going to me. Every November, first week of deer season, I'd take a week off work and spend it up there. The stand I hunted from was one my grandfather had built sometime in the 1970s. A wooden platform, maybe 4 feet by 5 feet, bolted into a white oak that had been old when my grandfather was young. 12 feet off the ground. I checked the boards and the bolts every single year before I trusted my weight to it. Solid construction. Good sight lines in 3 directions. The 4th direction, the slope behind and above me, was steeper, denser. Old laurel thickets up there. Deer didn't come from that direction much. You mostly watched the creek flat below and the 2 logging roads that came in from the sides. It was a Tuesday. First week of November. The kind of morning where the cold comes in off the mountains and sits inside your jacket no matter how many layers you have. I was up the ladder and settled in by 5:20, a full hour before legal shooting light. That was always my habit. Get in early, let the woods calm down after your arrival, let everything go back to normal before the light comes. By 6:15 it was gray enough to see. By 7, nothing had moved. That wasn't unusual by itself. Some mornings are slow. I sat and watched the creek flat and drank from my thermos and waited. By 7:45, I started noticing the quiet. And here's the thing, I need you to understand the difference between quiet and still. A quiet morning in the woods means you're not hearing much. But there's always something. A nuthatch working a bark seam somewhere. Squirrels running. The dry leaf rustle of a mouse moving through the duff. The woods are never truly silent, even in November, even on cold mornings. That morning, by 7:45, there was nothing. Not one sound. Not a single bird. Not a single squirrel. Nothing. I've heard that kind of silence exactly twice in my hunting life. Once just before a tornado came through the valley below when I was 19. And that morning, I started scanning. Slow movements. Eyes moving before my head. The way my grandfather had taught me. The creek flat below, nothing. The left logging road, nothing. The right logging road, nothing. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me and above me, up the slope in the laurel. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving through leaves and sticks like something that was not trying to be quiet, but was not in any hurry either. Just walking. Step. Step. Pause. Step. Not 4 beat. 2 beat. Something on 2 legs. I turned my head slowly. The slope behind me went up at maybe a 40-degree angle through bare hickories and then into the laurel thicket about 50 yards up. In November, with the leaves down, I could see through those hickories clearly. There was nothing moving up there. Nothing I could see. But the footsteps kept coming. I told myself, hunter. Has to be a hunter. Someone moving through the property who didn't know I was there. It happens. People don't always respect property lines, especially up in those mountains where some of the old boundaries haven't been marked in decades. I almost called out. I had my mouth open to do it. But something stopped me. I still don't know what. Some instinct I can't explain and don't particularly want to examine too closely. Something that said, don't. So I sat. And I listened. The footsteps came down the slope slowly. And as they got closer, 40 yards, 30 yards, maybe 25, I became more and more certain that whoever or whatever was walking down that slope toward me was not visible. Not hidden by terrain. Not obscured by brush. Just not there. I was 12 feet up. I had a clean sight line through bare timber. In November, in daylight, you can see a deer at 80 yards in those woods. You can see a person at 100. There was nothing there. And the footsteps kept coming. They stopped at the base of my tree. That's the part I've never been able to talk about without my voice changing. Because that was the moment I understood that something was standing directly below me. Something I could not see. And it had walked straight to me, straight to the base of that specific tree, out of 50 acres of timber. It knew where I was. For about 30 seconds, and I know 30 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but I promise you it is when you're gripping a rifle and staring out at nothing and trying to remember how to breathe. For about 30 seconds, there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Nothing. And then something pressed against the base of the tree. I felt it. I want to be really clear about that. I felt it through the wood, up through the platform, into my boots. A slow, even pressure against the bark. Deliberate. Not a branch falling. Not an animal brushing past. Deliberate contact. The way you'd press your hand flat against something to let it know you were there. I did not look down. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't look down. I don't have a good answer. I think some part of me understood that looking down was the wrong thing to do. That whatever was down there was making a choice about whether I got to leave, and that looking down might change its mind. So I sat. Completely still. Eyes forward. Hands white-knuckled on my rifle. Counting seconds in my head. At around what I think was the 2-minute mark, the pressure stopped. 20 seconds after that, I heard the footsteps again. Moving away. Back up the slope. Same slow, deliberate pace. Step. Step. Pause. Step. Getting quieter. And then gone. I waited 5 more minutes. I don't know why. Then I climbed down that ladder so fast I nearly fell, and I walked out of those woods in a straight line, not following the trail, just moving toward the sound of the road. I didn't run. Running felt like the wrong thing too. I walked fast, and I kept my breathing even, and I did not look back. When I got to my truck I sat in it for 20 minutes. Then I drove to my cousin Dale's house. He was home, still drinking his morning coffee. I sat down at his kitchen table and I told him everything. Every detail. The silence, the footsteps, the thing at the base of the tree. Dale is not a man who gets rattled. He's hunted those mountains his whole life, served 2 tours in the army, worked 20 years as a lineman in weather that would kill most people. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he set his coffee mug down. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That stand of yours, your granddad built it on the back side of the ridge, right? Up from the hollow?" I said yes. He nodded slowly. Like something was fitting together for him. And then he said, "Your granddad ever tell you why he built the stand where he did, instead of down in the flat near the creek like most people do?" I said no. I'd never thought to ask. Dale picked his coffee back up. He looked out the window. And he said, "Mine told me there were places up on that ridge you just didn't go after dark." Never really explained it more than that. Just, you didn't go. He didn't say anything else. And I didn't push. I've been back to that property twice since then. I hunt the creek flat now, down near the road. I haven't been back to that stand. My grandfather died in 1987. I never got to ask him what he knew about that slope. But sometimes I think about the fact that he built that stand the way he did, 12 feet up, facing away from the ridge, back to the slope. The way you'd position yourself if you knew something was up there and you decided to watch the other direction. Not because you weren't scared. Because you'd already learned that looking at it was worse. I want to say something before I start. I am not a superstitious person. I have a master's degree in wildlife biology. I have spent the better part of 15 years doing field research in remote terrain across 6 different states. I have been charged by a grizzly bear in Alaska, bitten by a rattlesnake in Utah, and I once spent 4 days stranded in the Ozarks after a flash flood took out the only trail I knew. None of those things broke me. None of those things left any lasting mark on how I think or sleep or move through the world. What happened to me on the trail above Bluff Creek Hollow in Yancey County, North Carolina, 2 years ago, that left a mark. I'm still not sure I understand what I saw. I've tried to explain it with the tools I have, the scientific framework I've spent 15 years building, and every explanation I come up with has a hole in it. A place where the logic stops and something else begins. Something I don't have a name for and don't particularly want one for. Here is what happened. It was the last week of September. I was conducting a solo survey of a camera trap network I'd set up the previous spring as part of a long-term black bear population study. 11 cameras, spread across an 11-mile loop of trail in a stretch of old-growth forest above 4,000 feet. I'd done this survey route 4 times already that year. I knew every section of it. I knew where the trail crossed the creek twice, where the blowdown from the previous winter slowed your pace, where the old hemlock grove made it dark even on bright days. I started at first light and worked north to south, pulling memory cards and checking camera housing. Good day. No rain, moderate temperatures, good visibility. By 2 in the afternoon I was into the back half of the loop, on the section that climbs steeply through a long stretch of old red oak and beech. That section of trail doesn't see much traffic. It's not maintained. It's not on any recreational map. You have to know it's there to find it. In 4 surveys I had never once encountered another person on that stretch. At approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, I came around a long left-hand bend in the trail and stopped walking. There was a woman about 90 yards ahead of me. She was standing in the middle of the trail, facing away from me, completely motionless. My first thought was, lost hiker. It happens in that terrain more than people realize. The tree cover is thick enough that GPS gets unreliable, the ridgelines all look similar, and people make wrong turns and end up much deeper in than they intended. I've encountered disoriented hikers before. The protocol is straightforward: approach calmly, assess their condition, help them reorient. I called out. Hello? Are you okay? My voice went up the trail and into the canopy and came back as nothing. She didn't move. I called again, louder this time. Nothing. I started walking toward her, slowly. I was running through the checklist in my head: signs of hypothermia, signs of disorientation, signs of injury. She was wearing light clothing, which concerned me. White or very pale gray top. Dark pants. No jacket I could see. No pack. No gear of any kind. No gear. That was the first thing that caught in my mind and didn't let go. You don't get to that section of trail without either knowing exactly where you're going or making a serious navigation error. Either way, you'd have gear. You'd have a bag. At minimum a water bottle. She had nothing. I got to about 60 yards and stopped. Something was wrong with the way she was standing, and I was only now close enough to see it clearly. Her feet were together. Not slightly apart the way a person naturally stands, not offset the way you stand on uneven ground. Together. Perfectly together, flat, parallel, like she was standing on a tile floor in a shopping mall, not on a root-covered trail that was angled at maybe 15 degrees and covered in loose rock and wet leaves. You can't stand like that on terrain like that. It's not physically natural. Your feet find their own position, make their own small adjustments, compensate for the surface. It happens automatically. You can't override it without thinking very hard about it, and even then, you'd wobble. She wasn't wobbling. I stood at 60 yards and I looked at her for a long time and I tried to make my brain accept that this was a normal situation. Lost hiker. Shock. Possible medical episode. There are neurological events that can cause a person to freeze. I ran through all of it. But my feet didn't move. Eventually I made them move. I walked forward again. Slowly. At about 45 yards, I stopped again without deciding to. Because I realized something. In the time I had been standing there, probably 4 or 5 minutes by that point, she had not moved. Not even the small involuntary movements that a living human body makes constantly. No shift of weight. No rise and fall of breathing that you can see from the back. No turn of the head. Nothing. The word that came into my head, and I did not invite it and I did not want it, was, placed. She looked like something that had been placed on the trail. I don't know how else to describe it and I've tried 100 times. I called out again. Nothing. I clapped my hands together once, hard. The sound cracked through the forest. She turned her head. Just her head. Nothing else. Her body didn't move, her shoulders didn't turn, her feet didn't shift. Just her head rotating slowly on her neck until she was looking back over her left shoulder at me. I stopped breathing. Her face was, I've spent 2 years trying to find the right words for this. I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to make it into something it wasn't. But the honest answer is that her face looked wrong in a way I could not and still cannot fully articulate. It wasn't disfigurement. It wasn't injury. It was something about the proportions. The way the features related to each other. The depth of the eyes relative to the cheekbones. Like the geometry of a human face was almost right but had been assembled by something that had studied faces without ever having one. Like a translation that's technically accurate but somehow off in every sentence. She looked at me. I looked at her. That lasted maybe 5 seconds. Maybe less. It felt much longer. Then she stepped off the trail. Into the trees on the left side. 1 step, 2 steps, and gone. No sound. I need you to understand that part. That section of trail runs through dry leaf litter 6 inches deep. Sticks, root tangles, loose rock. Every step I'd taken that day had been loud. Every deer and squirrel and bird I'd tracked over 15 years of fieldwork had made noise moving through cover like that. She made no sound. Not one leaf. Not one twig. Nothing. I stood on the trail for a very long time. I want to tell you I walked over to where she'd stepped off and looked into the trees. I want to tell you I was professional about it, clinical, did a proper sweep of the area and found a rational explanation. I didn't. I finished my survey and I walked out of those woods at a pace I'm not comfortable calling anything other than a controlled panic, and I checked behind me every 30 seconds for the remaining 4 miles of trail. When I got back to my truck I sat in it and I wrote down everything in my field notebook. Time, location, description. Every detail while it was still sharp. Then I went home and I pulled the memory card from camera trap 7. Camera 7 was positioned about 230 yards back down the trail from where I'd seen her, at a gap in the vegetation where a small game trail crossed the main trail. Good detection angle. I'd gotten solid footage from that camera all season. I put the card in my laptop. The camera had logged 11 trigger events that day. 9 were deer. 1 was what looked like a bobcat moving through fast. 1 was at 2:47 in the afternoon. At 2:47, I was still about 20 minutes back down the trail. I hadn't yet rounded the bend where I would see her at 3:15. I was still pulling a card from camera 5. The 2:47 event, something triggered the motion sensor and passed in front of the camera. The image was blurred. The camera had a half-second shutter lag, and whatever passed in front of it moved through the detection zone faster than the shutter could capture it cleanly. What I could make out from the image, something pale. Moving from left to right across the frame. Which meant it was moving south on the trail. Which was the same direction I was traveling. Which meant that at 2:47 in the afternoon, something pale was moving south on that trail, ahead of me, toward the bend where I would find a pale figure standing motionless 28 minutes later. I've looked at that image hundreds of times. I've zoomed in and adjusted the exposure and run it through every enhancement I know. I can tell you what it isn't. It isn't a deer, wrong shape, wrong height in the frame. It isn't a bear. It isn't light artifact or lens flare. What it is, I cannot tell you. The sheriff's department wasn't interested. No missing persons report matched the description. The Forest Service knew of no permitted researchers or survey crews working that area that day. I've asked every colleague I have who works that region. I've checked with the local hiking clubs, the hunting clubs, the trail maintenance volunteers. Nobody knows who she was. Nobody knows what she was doing up there without gear, without making sound, with her feet together on a slope trail, turning only her head to look at me with a face that was almost right. I still do fieldwork in the Appalachians. I still run camera trap surveys. I still go back into deep forest alone, and I still do my job. But I don't go back to Bluff Creek Hollow. And when I review camera footage now, when I'm sitting at my laptop going through trigger events one by one, I always feel something I never used to feel before. I feel like I'm hoping I won't recognize anything. That I'll get through the whole card and every frame will be a deer, a coyote, a bird. That I won't pull up a blurred pale shape moving fast through the frame. Moving toward wherever I'm going to be in 28 minutes. I haven't found another image like that one. But I still check. Every time.